Some truths are better left buried, Sharon Winchester had always told herself. But on her 40th birthday, staring at 3 identical DNA test kits on her kitchen counter, she couldn't ignore the weight of uncertainty any longer. Her brothers, James and Martin, stood beside her, their reflections in her spotless kitchen window, creating an image that had haunted them their entire lives. 3 faces, impossibly similar, yet each carved by 4 decades of distinctly different experiences. The mystery of their abandonment at St. Mary's Hospital in Boston had shaped their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. Found in 3 separate bassinets, in 3 different wards, on the same cold February morning in 1984, their story had made headlines. Triplets abandoned in bizarre hospital mystery. Each baby had been left with nothing but a silver pendant bearing a single letter, S, J, and M. Sharon, the only sister, ran her fingers over the worn silver S that hadn't left her neck in 40 years. "Are we really ready for this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The pendant felt heavier than usual, like it carried all the questions they'd accumulated over their lifetimes. James, the corporate lawyer who'd built his life on facts and evidence, picked up one of the DNA kits. "We've waited long enough," he said, his usual confidence wavering slightly. "Whatever we find out, we face it together." His own pendant, the J, caught the morning light, sending scattered reflections across the granite countertop. Martin, the quietest of the 3, a pediatric nurse who devoted his life to caring for abandoned children, simply nodded. His M pendant rose and fell with his deep breath. "Sharon's right, though. Once we do this, there's no going back. Whatever we discover, it could change everything." The journey to this moment had been long and complicated. Raised by different families in different parts of Massachusetts, they might never have found each other if not for a chance encounter at Boston University 20 years ago. Sharon and James had literally collided in the library, leading to a moment of shocked recognition that eventually brought Martin into their orbit as well. Their adoptive families had known nothing about their origins. Each had received an anonymous call about a baby needing a home, leading them to the hospital where they found their children, already cleared for adoption by social services. The investigation at the time had gone nowhere. Security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned, staff interviews yielded nothing, and records from that night showed suspicious gaps. "I found something else," Sharon said suddenly, reaching for her bag. She pulled out an old newspaper clipping, its edges yellow with age. "It was in a box of my adoption papers. I've never shown this to anyone." Her hands trembled as she smoothed it out on the counter. The headline read, "Local family tragedy strikes days before hospital abandonment." The article was largely deteriorated, but one line stood out clearly. "The Henderson family's disappearance remains unexplained." James grabbed the article, his lawyer's eyes scanning quickly. "Sharon, this is dated 3 days before we were found. Why didn't you show us this before?" "Because of what else I've found," she replied, pulling out another, smaller clipping. This one was more recent, dated just 2 months ago. "Henderson estate to be demolished. Last traces of family mystery to vanish." Martin leaned in closer, his medical training making him naturally observant. "Look at the photo of the house. There's something familiar about it." He touched his pendant unconsciously, a habit they all shared when nervous. Sharon nodded slowly. "I've been dreaming about that house my entire life. I always thought they were just nightmares, but when I saw this picture..." She paused, collecting herself. I think we've been there before." The DNA kits seemed to loom larger on the counter now, their simple white boxes holding the potential to unravel a mystery that went far beyond their abandonment. James picked up his kit again, this time with determination. "Whatever happened in that house, whatever we find out about the Hendersons or our real parents, we need to know." Sharon and Martin each reached for their kits, but before they could begin the process, Sharon's phone buzzed with a text message. The color drained from her face as she read it. "What is it?" Martin asked, touching her shoulder gently. Sharon turned the phone so they could all see the anonymous message. "Don't look for answers. Some doors should stay closed. For your own safety, leave the past where it belongs." They stared at each other, the weight of 40 years of questions hanging in the air between them. The DNA kits in their hands now felt like keys to a door that someone desperately wanted to keep locked. But who? And why, after all these years, were they being warned away from their own truth? James set his jaw firmly. We've lived with questions our entire lives. I'm done with mysteries and shadows. Whatever the truth is, we face it together. Martin and Sharon nodded, but as they opened their kits, none of them could shake the feeling that they were stepping onto a path that would lead them to places they couldn't imagine, and perhaps to answers they weren't prepared to face. The DNA test kits lay open on Sharon's kitchen table, 3 cotton swabs sealed in their sterile tubes. The threatening text message still glowed on Sharon's phone, but it had only strengthened their resolve. As they prepared to mail the samples, each sibling found themselves lost in thoughts of the paths that had led them to this moment. Sharon's hands trembled slightly as she applied the shipping label to her package. As a high school guidance counselor, she'd spent her career helping teenagers navigate their own identity crises, all while carrying the weight of her own uncertain origins. Her adopted parents, the Winchesters, had been loving and supportive, but they'd never fully understood her desperate need to know where she came from. Her marriage had ended 3 years ago, partly because her ex-husband couldn't understand why she couldn't just let the past stay in the past. "I keep thinking about what Mom and Dad would say about all this," Martin said softly, referring to the Carr-Martins, his adoptive parents. Both had passed away in a car accident 5 years ago, leaving him with an even greater sense of disconnection from his past. His work at Boston Children's Hospital's neonatal unit had become his anchor, particularly his dedication to abandoned infants. Every time he held a forgotten child, he couldn't help but wonder about that February morning 40 years ago. James adjusted his tie, a habit from countless courtroom appearances, and looked up from his phone where he'd been researching the Henderson family. "I found something interesting," he said, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. "The Henderson estate. It's not just being demolished, it's being erased. The Historical Society tried to preserve it, citing its architectural significance, but someone with deep pockets pushed the demolition through." "When?" Sharon asked, a chill running down her spine despite the warm spring afternoon streaming through her kitchen windows. "That's the thing," James replied, scrolling through his phone. "The demolition order was filed the day after I started asking questions about our adoption records at the courthouse. Could be a coincidence, but we don't believe in coincidences anymore," Martin finished, touching his pendant again. "Not after everything." Sharon walked to her refrigerator and pulled out 3 photos, each showing a different family. The Winchesters, the Carr-Martins, and the Hunters, James's adoptive family. "Look at these. Really look at them." She laid them side by side on the counter. "Notice anything strange?" James and Martin leaned in, studying the familiar faces of their adoptive families. At first, nothing seemed out of place, but then, "The timing," James said suddenly. "All these photos were taken the same year, 1983. The year before we were born," Martin added, his medical training making him naturally observant of details. "And look at the backgrounds, different cities, but—" "The same man," Sharon whispered, pointing to a blurry figure in the background of each photo. Though the images were grainy, there was no mistaking it. The same tall, distinguished-looking man appeared in the periphery of all 3 family photos, watching. "That's impossible," James muttered, but his legal mind was already connecting dots he didn't want to acknowledge. These families were in different cities. They didn't know each other. They had no connection until us. Sharon pulled out her laptop and opened a folder labeled Henderson Research. "I didn't show you everything I found," she admitted. "The Henderson family, they weren't just any wealthy family. They were involved in something called Project Mirror. Most of the records are sealed, but I found this—" She turned the screen to show them a newspaper article from 1983, "Henderson Foundation Pioneers Revolutionary Adoption Program." The photo showed the same man from their family pictures, identified as Dr. Robert Henderson, standing in front of a modern research facility. "He was watching them," Martin said, his voice barely audible. "All our adoptive families. He was monitoring them, selecting them." "But why?" James demanded, his composed facade cracking slightly. "Why us? Why 3 families? Why all the secrecy?" Before Sharon could respond, her doorbell rang, making them all jump. Through the frosted glass, they could see the silhouette of someone holding what appeared to be an envelope. "I'll get it," James said, moving toward the door. But Sharon grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said, pointing to her security camera feed. The person at the door was an elderly woman, probably in her 80s, wearing a nurse's uniform that looked decades out of date. "Oh my God," Martin breathed, recognition dawning on his face. "I know her. From the hospital archives. That's Margaret Chen. She was the head nurse at St. Mary's in 1984. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. The woman looked directly at the security camera, her expression urgent. In her hands, they could now see that the envelope was old, yellowed with age, and marked with 3 familiar symbols, S, J, and M. "She knows," Sharon whispered. "She knows what happened to us." The siblings exchanged glances, 40 years of questions hanging in the balance. The DNA tests were already on their way to the lab, but here, right now, was a living link to their past. Someone who was there the night they were separated. Someone who might know why they were chosen, why they were divided, and what connection they had to the mysterious Dr. Henderson and Project Mirror. But as James reached for the door handle, Sharon's phone buzzed again. Another anonymous text. "Don't trust the nurse, she's not what she seems. Remember room 384. The number sent a jolt through all 3 of them, though none could say why. Room 384. The numbers felt like a key unlocking a door in their minds, but what lay behind it remained just out of reach. The elderly nurse knocked again, more urgently this time, the envelope trembling in her weathered hands. James opened the door to find empty space where Nurse Chen had stood moments before. Only the envelope remained, propped against the welcome mat, its aged yellow paper bearing their initials in faded ink. The street behind was eerily quiet, with no sign of where the elderly nurse had gone. "This is impossible," Martin said, scanning the street with trained eyes. "She couldn't have moved that fast." His medical instincts kicked in as he remembered the security footage. And that uniform! It was exactly like the ones in the old hospital photos, down to the last detail. Sharon picked up the envelope with trembling hands, her guidance counselor's composure momentarily forgotten. The paper felt fragile, like it might disintegrate at any moment. "It smells like hospital antiseptic," Martin finished. "Old-school betadine. They stopped using this formula in the late 80s. Inside, they found a single black-and-white photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph showed a hospital corridor with a door marked 384. Standing in front of it was a younger Nurse Chen, along with 3 other nurses, each holding a baby. The date stamp read February 14, 1984, the day they were found. "Look at their faces," James said, his lawyer's eye for detail catching something unsettling. "The other nurses, they're all looking at the camera, but Nurse Chen is looking at something off-frame. She seems afraid." Sharon unfolded the note, its creases well-worn as if it had been opened and refolded countless times over the decades. The handwriting was shaky but legible. "The truth about room 384 will die with me, but you deserve to know why. Project Mirror wasn't about adoption. It was about selection. Dr. Henderson chose your families long before you were born. The pendants aren't just jewelry, they're keys. Find the music box in the Henderson estate before they tear it down. But be careful who you trust. Not everyone who shares your face shares your blood." Margaret Chen, St. Mary's Hospital night nurse supervisor, 1960-1985. "What does she mean, not everyone who shares your face?" Martin asked, his normally calm demeanor shaken. "There are only 3 of us." Sharon sat down heavily, her face pale. "Maybe not." She opened her laptop again, pulling up a file she'd been hesitant to share. "I found this in my adoption records. It's a birth record from St. Mary's, dated February 14th, 1984. It lists 4 babies." "4?" James and Martin said in unison. "The record is mostly redacted, but one thing is clear. 4 identical babies were born that day. 4 pendants were registered in the hospital's jewelry log, S, J, M, and..." She paused, swallowing hard. "And R." The silence that followed was deafening. 4 decades of believing they were triplets, only to discover there might be another sibling out there, another face that matched their own, another piece of their fractured history. James paced the room, his legal mind racing. The Henderson estate is being demolished tomorrow. If there's a music box there with answers, we have to go tonight, Martin finished. But that text warning about Nurse Chen, how did someone know she was coming? Who's watching us? Sharon's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a text but an email notification. The subject line made her blood run cold. DNA results processing. Unexpected findings. That's impossible, Martin said, looking over her shoulder. We just mailed the samples an hour ago. The email was from an unnamed administrator at the DNA testing company. Urgent notice regarding submission, batch HC384. Multiple genetic markers indicate possible contamination or anomaly. Please contact our specialist division immediately. Priority code, Mirror. HC384, James muttered. Henderson Corporation, room 384. This can't be a coincidence. Sharon opened the email, but instead of more details, they found only a single image, a birth certificate. The name was redacted, but the date and location were clear. February 14th, 1984, St. Mary's Hospital. And at the bottom, a signature they recognized from the Project Mirror documents, Dr. Robert Henderson. He wasn't just watching our adoptive families, Sharon whispered. He was there when we were born. He was part of it. Martin grabbed his car keys. The estate's an hour away. If we leave now... Wait, James interrupted, his face grave. The text messages warning us. What if they're not trying to stop us from finding the truth? What if they're trying to protect us from it? Sharon touched her pendant, feeling its familiar weight. Protection isn't always kind, she said quietly. Sometimes it's just another form of prison. I don't know about you, but I'm done being protected from my own history. As they gathered their things to leave, Sharon's security system chimed. Someone had uploaded new footage to her cloud storage. The timestamp showed it was from 30 minutes ago, but the footage was from her kitchen, from a camera that didn't exist. In the grainy video, they watched themselves opening the DNA kits, but now they could see what their own eyes had missed. In the window behind them, a fourth reflection, a face identical to theirs, watching silently before disappearing into the gathering dusk. Ah, Martin breathed. They've been close all along. James checked his watch. The demolition crew starts at dawn. Whatever answers that music box holds, whatever truth Dr. Henderson and Nurse Chen were trying to protect or expose, we've got 6 hours to find it. Sharon grabbed her coat, the mysterious fourth reflection burning in her mind. Remember what Mom used to say? She asked, looking at her brothers. The truth is like a shadow. The harder you chase it, the faster it runs. But shadows vanish in the light, James added, heading for the door. As they left Sharon's house, none of them noticed the small red light blinking on their pendants, activating for the first time in 40 years. In the Henderson estate, sealed away in room 384's counterpart, an old music box began to play. The Henderson estate loomed before them in the gathering darkness, its Victorian architecture casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. Construction equipment stood silent around the property like sleeping giants, ready to begin their work at dawn. Sharon's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she pulled up to the rusted gates, their headlights illuminating a no trespassing sign swaying gently in the evening breeze. I know this place, Martin said softly, his medical training forgotten in the face of overwhelming déjà vu. I've dreamed about that window. He pointed to a circular window on the 3rd floor, its glass reflecting the last remnants of twilight. The nursery. James checked his phone, his usual methodical nature asserting itself. No signal, of course. He pulled out Nurse Chen's note, studying it under the dim car light. The pendants are keys, she said. But keys to what? Sharon touched her S pendant, noticing for the first time how the back panel seemed to have a slight seam. All these years wearing them, did anyone ever try to open them? The siblings looked at each other, then simultaneously began examining their pendants. After 40 years, the seams were nearly invisible, but under pressure from their fingers, each pendant clicked softly and split apart. Inside each was a tiny key, no longer than a thumbnail. 3 keys, James muttered, holding his up to the fading light. "But 4 siblings. 4 reflections," Sharon corrected, remembering the mysterious figure in her kitchen window. "Maybe that's what Nurse Chen meant about not everyone who shares our face sharing our blood." They approached the house cautiously, aware that every step was taking them closer to answers they'd spent a lifetime seeking. The front door was chained and padlocked, but a side entrance near the kitchen had been recently used. The dust on the handle was disturbed. "Someone's been here," Martin observed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Recently." Inside, the house was a maze of sheet-covered furniture and boxes marked for auction. Their flashlight beams created dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating faded photographs of the Henderson family. In each one, Dr. Robert Henderson stood proud and stern, but his eyes seemed to hold a secret burden. "3rd floor," Sharon said, leading the way up the creaking stairs. "The nursery, that's where it all started." As they climbed, James's analytical mind pieced together what they knew. Project Mirror wasn't just about adoption. The timing of our adoptive families being chosen, the monitoring, the 4th baby, this was something else. Something bigger. They reached the 3rd floor, and Martin stopped suddenly. "Listen." In the silence they could hear it, a faint mechanical ticking, like a clock winding down. Following the sound, they found themselves in front of a door marked with a familiar number, 384. "The same as the hospital room," Sharon breathed. It wasn't a room number at all. It was a code. Their pendants began to glow softly in the darkness, the tiny red lights pulsing in unison with the ticking sound. James stepped forward with his key, then hesitated. "Whatever we find in there, we face it together." Sharon and Martin nodded, and they inserted their keys into 3 nearly invisible locks arranged in a triangle around the doorknob. As they turned them simultaneously, the ticking grew louder, and the door swung open with a whisper of old hinges. The nursery was exactly as it appeared in Sharon's dreams, a circular room with the round window overlooking the grounds. 4 identical cribs stood in a perfect square, their white paint peeling with age, and in the center, on a dusty table, sat an ornate music box. But they weren't alone. Standing at the window, silhouetted against the rising moon, was a figure they knew as well as their own reflections. As the person turned, they saw their own face looking back at them, but older, harder, marked by decades of a very different life. "Welcome home," said a voice identical to their own. "I've been waiting 40 years for this moment." The figure stepped into the beam of their flashlights, revealing a pendant marked with the letter R, but unlike their pendants, this one was scratched and dented, its surface darkened with age. "Rachel," Sharon whispered, the name coming to her lips without knowing how she knew it. The woman, their sister, smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The 4th reflection, the one they tried to erase. She gestured to the music box. "Shall we finally learn why our dear father tore apart his greatest experiment?" "Father?" Martin stepped back, shock evident on his face. "Dr. Henderson was—" "Our biological father, yes," Rachel confirmed, "and Project Mirror was his life's work. 4 perfect copies, raised in controlled environments, nature versus nurture taken to its ultimate extreme." She ran a finger along the music box's intricate carvings. "But something went wrong, didn't it? Something that made him hide us away, separate us, try to make us forget." James moved forward, his lawyer's instincts warring with the emotional turmoil of the moment. "If you're really our sister, why stay hidden all these years? Why not come to us?" Rachel's laugh was bitter. "Hidden? I've been watching over you since the day they took you away, making sure you stayed safe, stayed apart. The text messages, the warnings. All me. I was trying to protect you from the truth. But now—" She gestured to the demolition equipment outside. "Now they're erasing the last evidence, and I can't let that happen." She reached for the music box, but Sharon's voice stopped her. "The DNA tests," she said. "You intercepted them somehow. What did they show?" Rachel's hand froze above the music box. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. "You really want to know? It will change everything you believe about who you are, about what we are." Before anyone could respond, A new sound cut through the night. Vehicles approaching, multiple engines. Rachel rushed to the window. They're early. The demolition wasn't supposed to start until dawn. Those aren't construction vehicles, James said grimly, recognizing the sleek black SUVs pulling up to the house. Someone else knows we're here. Rachel's face hardened. The Project Mirror Oversight Committee. They're still active, still protecting their secrets. She turned to her siblings, real fear in her eyes. We have minutes, maybe less. The music box holds proof of what they did to us, what they created. But once you know, you can never go back. Are you ready for that? The sound of car doors slamming echoed from below, followed by rapid footsteps on the stairs. Sharon looked at her brothers, then at the sister they'd never known, seeing in each face a reflection of her own determination. The music box began to play on its own, a haunting melody that stirred memories none of them knew they had. As the footsteps grew closer, Rachel's hand moved toward the hidden catch that would reveal its secrets. Last chance, she whispered. Some doors once opened. The doorknob behind them began to turn. In the split second before the door opened, Rachel made her decision. She grabbed the music box and pressed all three of their pendants into triangular indentations on its surface that they hadn't noticed before. The melody that had been playing changed pitch, and the box's lid sprang open, revealing not jewelry or trinkets, but a stack of aged medical documents and a worn VHS tape. "Fire escape," she hissed, shoving the box's contents into Sharon's hands. "Now!" The door burst open, revealing three men in dark suits, led by an elderly man they recognized from the old photographs, Dr. Henderson's research partner, Dr. Marcus Webb. His face, once handsome, was now deeply lined with age and something that looked remarkably like guilt. "Stop," he called out, his voice carrying an authority that made them all freeze instinctively. "Please. You don't understand what you're dealing with." Rachel moved protectively in front of her siblings. "I think we understand perfectly, Uncle Marcus. Or should I tell them about your role in all this? About how you helped Father perfect the procedure?" The word uncle hit the siblings like a physical blow. Sharon clutched the documents tighter, her counselor's training helping her maintain composure, even as her world tilted on its axis. "Uncle," she whispered. Dr. Webb's face softened. "Your father was brilliant, but he was also obsessed. The Henderson Family Genetics Project, what you know as Project Mirror, it was revolutionary. Too revolutionary. We thought we could perfect human development, create the ideal environment for nurturing specific traits. 4 identical children, raised in carefully controlled circumstances. We were experiments," Martin said flatly, his medical knowledge allowing him to grasp the implications quickly. "But something went wrong, didn't it?" "Everything went right," Rachel corrected bitterly. "That was the problem. Show them, Sharon. Show them what's in those files." Sharon opened the first folder with trembling hands. Inside were 4 birth certificates, all dated February 14, 1984. But what caught her eye was the mother's name, identical on each document, Elizabeth Webb Henderson. "Our mother," James breathed. "She was your sister." He looked at Dr. Webb, who nodded slowly. "My beloved sister and Robert's wife," he confirmed. "She didn't survive the birth. The procedure, it was too much for her system." Robert was devastated. He blamed himself, his research, his obsession with creating the perfect genetic lineage. In his grief, he decided to separate you to give you normal lives away from all of this. "Normal?" Rachel's laugh was harsh. "Is that what you call what you did to me? Keeping me here, raising me in isolation while you monitored my siblings from afar? Teaching me to watch them, to protect them from a distance?" Dr. Webb took a step forward, his hands raised placatingly. "Rachel, you don't understand. The genetic modifications were unprecedented. We had to have a control subject, someone to monitor for any complications." "Complications?" Martin's medical training kicked in again. "What kind of complications?" But Sharon was already reading through the documents, her face growing paler. The genetic alterations, they weren't just about making us identical. They were trying to create something more. Enhanced cognitive abilities, accelerated healing, extended lifespan. She looked up, horror dawning in her eyes. We're not just quadruplets. We're the first successful human genetic modifications. James took the papers, his legal mind racing. This is why you're demolishing the house, destroying the evidence. This kind of experimentation, it was illegal even then. It was necessary, Dr. Webb insisted. Your father saw the potential for eliminating genetic diseases, for advancing human evolution itself. But after Elizabeth died, his conscience couldn't bear it. He wanted you to have normal lives, away from the weight of being what you are. What we are, Rachel repeated softly. Show them the tape, Sharon. Show them what happened the night they took you away. Sharon pulled out an old portable DVD player from her bag. She'd brought it, hoping to review any security footage they might find. With shaking hands, she inserted the converted VHS tape. The screen flickered to life, showing the nursery as it had been 40 years ago. 4 babies lay in their cribs, all perfectly identical. But as they watched, something extraordinary happened. One of the babies, Rachel, they realized, began to cry, and immediately all 4 of them reached out toward each other, their tiny hands glowing with a soft blue light. Quantum entanglement, Dr. Webb explained quietly. At a cellular level, you're connected in ways science still can't fully explain. That's why you found each other at the university, why you shared dreams, why Rachel could always sense when you were in danger. Your father's work succeeded beyond anything we imagined possible, but the implications, the ethical considerations, the power to change human evolution itself, Rachel finished, and the responsibility that comes with it. That's why I stayed away, why I only watched from the shadows. I knew that if we ever came together again, if the truth came out. Suddenly the house's ancient electrical system surged. The lights flared brilliantly, and all 4 siblings felt something awakening inside them, a connection they'd always sensed but never understood. Their pendants began to pulse with blue light, just like in the video. Dr. Webb stepped back, alarm crossing his face. It's happening again, the quantum resonance. You have to stay separated. The energy output when you're together, it's too dangerous. But Sharon stood her ground, reaching for her siblings' hands. No more running. No more hiding. No more secrets. As their hands touched, the blue light grew stronger, and with it came a flood of shared memories. Their first moments together, their mother's voice singing softly, the night they were separated. The men with Dr. Webb raised what looked like scientific instruments, their displays showing rapidly escalating energy readings. The quantum field is expanding, one of them reported urgently. If we don't contain it. You can't contain it, Rachel said calmly. So you can't contain us, not anymore. The blue light enveloped them completely, as 40 years of separation, of carefully maintained distance, finally came to an end. In that moment of connection, they weren't just 4 individuals. They were a single experiment that had succeeded too well, a family too powerful to be allowed to exist, and siblings who had finally found their way back to each other. The instruments in the men's hands began to spark and smoke as the energy field grew stronger. Dr. Webb backed away, real fear in his eyes. "Robert," he whispered, "what did we create?" The answer hung in the air as the blue light reached its peak, and the truth of what they were and what they could become stood revealed in the glow of their shared destiny. The blue light faded gradually, leaving the siblings standing in a circle, their joined hands still tingling with the aftermath of their connection. The genetic modifications their father had engineered, the quantum entanglement that bound them together, had awakened fully for the first time since their separation as infants. But rather than the catastrophe Dr. Webb had feared, the energy had stabilized, creating a perfect harmony between them. "It's beautiful," Martin whispered, his medical training allowing him to sense the subtle changes in their shared biology. "We're not just connected mentally. Our cellular structures are actually synchronizing, strengthening each other." Dr. Webb stared at his instruments in disbelief. "This is impossible. The models showed the quantum field would become unstable if you ever fully reconnected. The power should have torn you apart." "Your models were wrong," Rachel said softly, tears streaming down her face as 40 years of isolation finally ended. "You and Father never understood. The separation was what made us unstable. We were meant to be together." Sharon reached for the scattered medical documents, her counselor's instincts helping her piece together the full picture. The genetic modifications weren't just about enhancement. Look at these notes. Father was trying to create a sustainable support system. Our connection doesn't drain energy. It creates it. We make each other stronger. James examined the papers with his lawyer's precision. These dates. Father knew. After Mother died, he discovered the truth. That's why he hid us, protected us. Not because we were dangerous together, but because others would want to exploit what we could do. Dr. Webb sank into a dusty chair, suddenly looking every one of his 80 years. Robert tried to tell me at the end. Before the cancer took him, he wanted to bring you back together. But I wouldn't listen. I was too afraid of what we'd created, too guilty about Elizabeth's death. He looked up at them, his eyes filled with decades of regret. Your mother would be so proud. She always said you would find each other. The men with their instruments backed away, unsure how to handle this unexpected turn of events. But Rachel stepped forward, facing her uncle with a lifetime of questions in her eyes. Why did you keep me here? All these years watching them from afar, never able to reach out. Because you were the strongest, Dr. Webb admitted. Your readings were always the highest. We thought you might be able to help control the others if anything went wrong. Instead, you became their guardian angel, protecting them in ways we never imagined possible. Sharon opened the music box again, finding a hidden compartment they'd missed before. Inside was a letter, the paper yellow with age, and a photograph. The picture showed their mother, Elizabeth, pregnant and radiant, sitting in this very nursery. Behind her stood their father, Dr. Robert Henderson, his face full of love and worry. With trembling hands, Sharon read the letter aloud. My beloved children, if you're reading this, then you've found your way back to each other, just as I always knew you would. The genetic modifications your father created were never meant to be a weapon or a scientific breakthrough. They were born of love. We wanted to create children who would never be truly alone, who would always be connected to each other in the deepest way possible. The quantum entanglement was unexpected, a miracle we still don't fully understand. But it was never the danger Marcus and the others feared. It was a gift, meant to keep you safe and whole. Your father's only mistake was letting his fear and grief drive you apart. I won't survive bringing you into this world. The doctors have made that clear. But know that every moment of pain is worth it, knowing that you'll have each other. The bond between you is more than science. It's love made manifest, written into the very structure of your cells. Find each other. Forgive your father. And remember that you are not experiments or mistakes. You are miracles. All my love, Elizabeth. The silence that followed was profound. Dr. Webb stood shakily, tears running down his weathered face. We've spent 40 years trying to contain something that was never meant to be contained. Can you ever forgive us? Rachel looked at her siblings, feeling their thoughts and emotions flowing through their connection. There's nothing to forgive, she said finally. Everything that happened led us to this moment, to understanding who and what we are. Suddenly, the demolition equipment outside roared to life. The crew had arrived early, eager to begin their work. The old house shuddered with the first impact. The evidence, Dr. Webb said urgently. All of Robert's research, everything that proves what was done, it has to be destroyed. For your safety. The world isn't ready for what this means. But Sharon was already shaking her head. No more hiding, no more secrets. She gathered the documents and the video, holding them close. This isn't just about us anymore. Father's research, it could help so many people. Genetic diseases, cellular degeneration, the possibilities are endless. And we'll do it right this time, Martin added, his medical knowledge seeing the potential. Ethically, transparently, together. James nodded, already formulating the legal frameworks they would need. We'll create a foundation, the Henderson Webb Institute for Genetic Research, continue Father's work, but with proper oversight and controls. The house shook again as the demolition continued. Doctor. Webb looked at each of them in turn, seeing not the experiments they had been, but the family they had become. Your mother was right, he said softly. You are miracles. Rachel took her siblings' hands again, feeling the warm pulse of their connection. We should go. This house has held its secrets long enough. As they made their way down through the creaking house, their joined energy lighting the way, Dr. Webb and his men followed quietly. Outside, the demolition crew stopped their work, staring in amazement at the four identical siblings walking out of the old mansion, their clasped hands glowing softly in the pre-dawn light. "What now?" Martin asked as they reached their cars. Sharon smiled, feeling the strength of their bond. "Now we do what we were born to do. We help people understand that the things that make us different don't have to make us afraid." The rising sun caught their pendants, making them shimmer with remembered light. Behind them, the Henderson estate began to fall, but its secrets and its miracles would live on in the four lives it had created and finally brought back together. 6 months later, the Henderson Webb Institute for Genetic Research stood gleaming in the morning sun, its modern architecture a stark contrast to the Victorian mansion that had held their secrets for so long. Sharon walked through the main entrance, her pendant catching the light. Now transformed into her security badge, the letter S, a reminder of how far they'd come. The lobby featured a striking photograph, 4 identical babies in their cribs, captured in that moment of first connection 40 years ago. Beside it hung a portrait of Elizabeth Henderson, their mother, her gentle smile watching over the Institute's work. The plaque beneath read, "In memory of Elizabeth Webb Henderson, love is the greatest science of all." Sharon found her siblings in the main conference room, preparing for their first public presentation. Martin, still in his hospital scrubs from his morning rounds at Boston Children's, was reviewing their latest research data. Their work, combining his medical expertise with their father's genetic breakthroughs, had already shown promising results in treating several rare genetic disorders. James looked up from his laptop, where he'd been finalizing the Institute's latest patent applications. His legal background had proved invaluable in navigating the complex ethical and regulatory frameworks they'd established. "The NIH representatives are confirmed for 2 o'clock, he said. "They're particularly interested in the cellular regeneration studies." Rachel, who had finally stepped out of the shadows to become their head of security, was monitoring the building's advanced systems. After decades of watching from afar, she'd found her place as their protector in the open, ensuring their father's research would never be misused. "Uncle Marcus called," she said, looking up from her screens. "The last of Father's old research team has agreed to come forward. Their testimonies will help establish the historical record properly." Sharon nodded, touching her pendant thoughtfully. The quantum connection between them had stabilized over the months, becoming less dramatic but more integral to their daily lives. They could sense each other's presence, share strong emotions, and even occasionally thoughts. But most importantly, they had learned to use their unique bond to help others. "I had that dream again last night," Martin said quietly, "about Mother in the nursery, singing to us. But this time, it felt different. More like a memory," Sharon finished. Their shared dreams had become clearer since their reunion, as if their connection was helping them recover moments from their earliest days together. James pulled up their latest research results on the conference room's main screen. "The genetic markers we inherited from Father's modifications, we're finally beginning to understand them. The quantum entanglement wasn't just about connecting us to each other. It was about proving what's possible," Rachel added. "When people work together, when they're willing to share their strengths and support each other's weaknesses." "Speaking of which," Sharon interrupted, "did you all feel that pulse last night? Around 3 a.m.? They all nodded. Their connection had detected something new, another resonance similar to their own but distinct. "The genetic screening program found another case," Martin confirmed, pulling up a medical file. "A pair of twins in Seattle. Their DNA shows similar markers to ours. Not as pronounced, but definitely there. Natural mutations following the same path Father's research identified." "Which means we're not alone," James said softly. "There are others out there, carrying these possibilities in their genes. Not experiments like us, but proof that humanity itself is evolving toward greater connection." Rachel touched her pendant, remembering all the years she'd spent watching her siblings from afar. "We should reach out to them, offer guidance, support. Help them understand what they're experiencing." "Already done," Sharon smiled. "Their parents are flying in next week. Apparently the twins have been sharing dreams since they were born. Sound familiar? The conference room door opened and Dr. Marcus Webb entered, looking more at peace than they'd seen him since the night at the mansion. "The press is gathering downstairs," he said. "Are you ready to share your story with the world?" Sharon looked at her siblings, not just her family now, but her partners in something much bigger than themselves. Through their connection, she could feel their mixed emotions: excitement, nervousness, determination, and above all, a profound sense of rightness. They had transformed their father's controversial experiment into something that could genuinely help people while honoring their mother's vision of love expressed through science. "Actually," Sharon said, "we have a surprise for you first, Uncle Marcus." Martin handed him a tablet displaying their latest research results. "We found something in Father's original genetic sequences, a pattern we didn't understand until now." Marcus studied the data, his eyes widening. This looks like a signature," James confirmed. "Mother's genetic signature, woven into the modifications. She wasn't just a participant in the experiment. She was the key to making it work." "Elizabeth," Marcus whispered, touching the screen gently. "She always said the project needed more heart, more humanity. We thought she was being sentimental, but she knew," Rachel finished. "She understood what Father's science needed to make it complete. Love wasn't just an emotion to her. It was a fundamental force, as real as gravity or electromagnetism. She encoded it into our very DNA." Sharon gathered her papers for the press conference, feeling the warm pulse of connection with her siblings. "Ready to tell the world that science and love aren't opposites?" she asked. "That the greatest breakthroughs happen when we embrace both?" Through their bond, she felt their unified response. Together they headed for the elevators, ready to share their story. As they descended to the lobby, their pendants glowed softly, not with the dramatic blue light of that first reconnection, but with a steady warmth that spoke of family, purpose, and the kind of love that could rewrite the very code of human existence. Behind them in the conference room, the morning sun caught Elizabeth's portrait just right, making her smile seem to brighten as she watched her children, her greatest experiment, her most profound legacy, step forward to change the world in exactly the way she had always known they would, together. 1 year later, the support group meeting was Sharon's favorite part of the week. Looking around the circle of faces in the Institute's community room, she saw the same mix of wonder and relief she'd felt when she first discovered the truth about her own family. Today's group was larger than usual: 3 sets of twins, a trio of siblings, and even a pair of cousins, all displaying varying degrees of genetic connectivity, similar to what she shared with her brothers and sister. "The dream started when I was 5, a young woman named Lucy was saying, her twin sister Emma nodding beside her. "We thought everyone had a special connection with their siblings. It wasn't until we saw your press conference that we understood what was happening to us." Martin, who ran these sessions with Sharon, leaned forward in his chair. His medical expertise had been crucial in helping these families understand their unique genetic traits. "The connection manifests differently in each case," he explained. "For some, it's shared dreams. For others, emotional resonance. The important thing is learning to embrace it rather than fear it." Rachel, watching from her usual spot by the door, caught Sharon's eye and smiled. After a lifetime of isolation, her sister had found her calling helping others navigate their own unique bonds. The security concerns that had once kept them apart now served to protect and support a growing community of connected families. James entered quietly, carrying a stack of folders. Since leaving his law practice to work full-time at the Institute, he'd become the leading expert in advocating for families with genetic connections. "The latest policy proposal passed committee," he announced. "Schools will now be required to accommodate connected siblings in their placement decisions." A mother in the group burst into tears of relief. "You mean my girls won't have to be separated anymore? The school insisted they needed to develop independently, but being apart hurts them so much." "Those old theories about forced separation promoting individual development have been thoroughly debunked," Sharon assured her. "Our research shows that connected siblings actually develop stronger individual identities when their bond is supported rather than suppressed." The Institute had documented over 50 cases now, ranging from subtle empathic connections to profound bonds like their own. Each discovery helped build their understanding of how these genetic traits manifested and evolved. "I have a question," said David, another group member, his cousin Alice nodding encouragingly beside him. "Yesterday, during the resonance testing, Dr. Webb mentioned something about the Henderson pattern. What exactly is that?" Sharon shared a look with her siblings. It was time to tell them. "The Henderson pattern," she began, "is what we call the specific genetic sequence our mother encoded into our DNA. We've found variations of it in every connected family we've studied. It's not artificial like ours. It occurs naturally, but very rarely." "Think of it like a key," Martin added. "Our father's experiments didn't create something new. They amplified something that was already possible within human genetics. Our mother understood this. She knew these connections were humanity's future, not just a scientific breakthrough." Rachel moved to the center of the room, pulling up a holographic display of interlinked DNA strands. "Each time we find another family like yours, we learn more about how these connections work. The pattern shows up in less than 1% of the population, but it's becoming more common with each generation." "Evolution in action," James said softly. "Not a mutation or an anomaly, but the next step in human development. The science is fascinating, but what matters most is helping families like yours understand and embrace your gifts." A teenage boy raised his hand. "But what about the people who think we're freaks? My teacher said we're like X-Men or something." Laughter rippled through the room, but Sharon shook her head seriously. "This isn't about superpowers or science fiction. It's about human connection in its purest form. The ability to truly understand and support each other isn't a mutation. It's an expression of our highest potential as human beings." "Speaking of potential," Rachel interjected, "the results from the twin study in Seattle came in." She passed her tablet to Martin, who studied it with growing excitement. "The markers are getting stronger," he confirmed. "Third-generation connected families are showing more stable, controlled bonds. It's like watching accelerated evolution in real time." A new mother in the group hugged her infant twins closer. "Will my babies be okay? Will they be accepted?" Sharon moved to sit beside her. "They'll be more than okay. They'll grow up in a world that understands what they are." The Institute isn't just about research. It's about building a community where these connections are celebrated, not feared. "And about damn time too," came a gruff voice from the doorway. Uncle Marcus walked in, leaning on his cane but smiling broadly. "Your mother would be so proud, not just of you four, but of all of this." He gestured to the room full of connected families. "She always said love would find a way to write itself into our very beings." The meeting wound down as evening approached. Families lingered, sharing experiences and phone numbers, building the kind of support network Sharon and her siblings had been denied for so long. The Institute had become more than a research facility. It was a beacon for those discovering their own unexpected connections. Later, as they cleaned up the community room, Sharon felt a familiar warmth through her bond with her siblings. Looking up, she saw them all touching their pendants unconsciously, sharing the moment without words. "Mother's journal was right," Rachel said softly. "Remember what she wrote? The greatest scientific discoveries don't create new truths. They simply reveal what was possible all along." Sharon nodded, watching the last family leave, the twins holding hands, their mother's face bright with new understanding. Through the window, the sun was setting behind the Institute's modern buildings, casting long shadows that reminded her of that night in the old mansion. But where those shadows had held secrets and fear, these were full of promise and possibility. "Ready for tomorrow?" James asked. "The UN panel on genetic diversity wants to hear our recommendations on supporting connected families worldwide." Martin smiled. "As long as we're together, we're ready for anything." Sharon touched her pendant, feeling the steady pulse of their bond, no longer a mysterious force, but a reminder of who they were and what they could help others become. Their story had started in separation and secrecy, but it had bloomed into something their parents could never have imagined, a future where the deepest connections between people were finally understood, accepted, and celebrated. The last light of day caught the portrait of Elizabeth Henderson in the lobby, and for a moment Sharon could have sworn she saw her mother's smile brighten as if to say, "This is only the beginning." 2 years later. Room 384 at St. Mary's Hospital looked very different now. The stark medical space had been transformed into a warm, welcoming genetic counseling center, its walls adorned with photos of connected families from around the world. Sharon stood in the doorway, remembering the night 40 years ago when their journey began in this very room. "Hard to believe, isn't it?" Martin said softly, joining her. His white coat now bore the Henderson Webb Institute's logo alongside his hospital credentials. From 4 abandoned babies to this, the center was their latest initiative, bringing the Institute's resources directly into hospitals to support families discovering their own genetic connections. Today was particularly special. They were celebrating the birth of the first third-generation Henderson Patton twins identified at birth. Rachel appeared with an elderly woman in a wheelchair, Margaret Chen, now 92, but still sharp as ever. After coming forward with the truth about that night, she'd become an honorary member of their family and a beloved figure at the Institute. "Just like old times," Nurse Chen smiled, patting Rachel's hand. "Though I must say, I prefer seeing happy families unite rather than watching them be separated." James arrived last, carrying a small ornate box that made them all pause. It was their mother's music box, restored and repurposed. Inside now lay 4 new pendants, waiting for their next generation of caretakers. "The adoptive parents are ready," he said. "They've been fully briefed on what to expect as the twins develop their connection." Sharon nodded, touching her own pendant. "Such a different welcome than we had. No more secrets, no more fear." They entered the hospital room together, where 2 sets of parents sat with their newborn twins. The babies, only hours old, already displayed the telltale signs of the Henderson pattern, reaching for each other, their tiny hands occasionally shimmering with that familiar blue light. "Welcome to the family," Sharon said warmly. She could feel her siblings' emotions mingling with her own, joy, pride, and a touch of healing sadness for their own separated beginnings. Uncle Marcus joined them, moving slower these days, but still dedicated to their work. "Your mother's theory was right," he said, watching the babies. "The pattern isn't just getting stronger, it's becoming more refined. These little ones will have better control, clearer connections than any we've seen before." Rachel opened the music box, revealing the new pendants. "These are different from ours," she explained to the parents. "They're not keys to locked doors anymore. They're bridges, helping the children understand and manage their connection as they grow." "The genetic markers are perfectly expressed," Martin added, reviewing the test results. "All the enhancement potential of our father's work, but occurring naturally. Evolution is catching up to his vision, but doing it the right way." James handed each family a thick folder. "Everything you need to know is in here. Legal protections, educational guidelines, medical protocols. But most importantly, you'll have our complete support. No one walks this path alone anymore." Sharon sat with the mothers, showing them how to recognize and respond to their baby's unique needs. "The connection isn't just genetic, it's emotional, spiritual even. Your love and acceptance will help them thrive." Through their own bond, the siblings shared a moment of profound gratitude. Their story had come full circle, transforming a night of separation and loss into a legacy of unity and understanding. Later, as the sun set over Boston, they gathered in the hospital garden. The space had been redesigned as a memorial, centered around a statue of Elizabeth Henderson. The plaque read, "Love finds its way through blood and bone, heart and memory, science and soul." "Did you ever imagine this?" Sharon asked, looking at her siblings. "That night in the mansion when we learned the truth, did you think we'd end up here?" Rachel smiled, no longer the isolated guardian, but a woman surrounded by family and purpose. "Mother knew. That's why she left us the music box, the pendants, the pattern itself. She saw what her love and father's science could become. A bridge between what we were and what we could be," Martin added, thinking of all the families they'd helped. James touched the statue gently. "Not just for us, but for everyone. The capacity for deeper connection was always there. It just needed to be understood, not feared." They stood together as darkness fell, their pendants glowing softly. Above them, stars emerged one by one, like distant mirrors reflecting the connections that bound them all. Family and friends, past and future, science and love. Sharon Winchester. They turned to find a young nurse holding a tablet. "Sorry to interrupt, but you have visitors. Another family just arrived, twins from Argentina. They saw your last paper on genetic resonance and recognized their own experience." Sharon looked at her siblings, feeling their shared response through their bond. "Tell them we'll be right there. After all, this is what we were born for." As they walked back into the hospital, Sharon paused for one last look at their mother's statue. The setting sun caught Elizabeth's face just right, and for a moment, Sharon could have sworn she saw that same soft blue light reflecting in her mother's gentle smile. Their story had begun with separation, fear, and secrets. But it had grown into something far greater, a testament to the power of connection, the strength of family, and the endless possibilities that arise when love and science work as one. Inside St. Mary's Hospital, in rooms now filled with light and hope, new chapters were beginning. Other families would find their way to understanding, acceptance, and the profound joy of genuine connection. And through it all, 4 siblings who had once been lost would continue to light the way, their bond a beacon guiding others home. The Henderson pattern would continue to emerge, evolve, and flourish, not as an experiment or an anomaly, but as proof that the deepest truths of human existence had been written in their DNA all along, the endless capacity for love, connection, and understanding that made them who they were always meant to be, together. Dear friends, we hope you enjoyed this story as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time to do so. Your subscription means the world to us and helps us keep sharing amazing and heartfelt stories with you. Your feedback is incredibly important to us. Did you like the story? Please leave a comment and let us know what you think. It helps us continue creating stories that resonate and inspire. Right now, a playlist of more stories from our channel is appearing on your screen. We invite you to explore and enjoy these other captivating tales. Thank you for being part of our journey. We look forward to sharing more stories with you soon. Until next time.